Do you know, in my wildest dreams, I could never have imagined I would be where I am today. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. I was born in 1975 and I'm a fourth generation Australian whose great-grandparents migrated out from England, France, and of Scottish descent. I have one older sister and I come from what I consider to be a middle-class family. We had a beach house we used to visit during the holidays and a swimming pool in the backyard. I recall spending many nights outside staring up into the stars, thinking about how amazing the universe was and how I was almost nothing in comparison with the size of it. I also used to wonder why I was here. My grandparents were practicing Christians, but neither of my parents believed in God. However, they allowed us to attend church with our grandparents, so I was exposed to some Christian beliefs from a young age. We used to attend Sunday school, and I remember enjoying the activities they gave the children. During this time, I learned about many of the prophets sent by God and some of their miracles. After I grew a little older, they invited me in to attend a church sermon, and I recall hearing them saying that Jesus was God, but in my heart I rejected this idea. I thought Jesus was a great man, better than any other man, but I didn't believe he was a God. How could a tiny man be the God of this huge universe? I also listened to the Reverend reading from the Bible and explaining the verse, but I felt he was changing the meaning. I decided at that point that church was not for me. Although I don't recall rejecting God at this stage, but my beliefs were not congruent with the teachings of the church. However, as years passed, my parents influenced my ideas, and I later became a devout atheist. I would proudly proclaim that there was no God and that religion was only for the weak-minded. From around 7 years old, with my father's encouragement, I became a dedicated tennis player. I put all my energy into tennis until around the age of 13. I made it into the state squad. But around that time, all my friends were talking about the fun they were having, and I didn't want to miss out. So I quit tennis and put all my energy into having fun. Unfortunately, this landed me into a bit of trouble. I started smoking cigarettes at a young age, then drinking, partying, and it wasn't too long before I fell into drugs, and by the time I was 18, I was shooting up. But just as I got involved with the wrong group of friends, I had this strange experience where I heard a stern voice inside my head saying, "Stop." So I left these friends and went back to my old friends who were against drugs. But I continued partying and living a very carefree life, although I would often question if certain things were right or not. Having no real direction and purpose in life, I left school before completing Year 10 and found work anywhere I could. I had many different jobs but didn't find anything satisfactory. At around 17 years old, I completed a secretarial course and worked for a large law firm for some time. I began working in the communications room, doing a lot of photocopying, and later started working in the accounts department. After some time, they were training me to enter the accounts sheets, but I was so shocked they were charging $50 a copy, which I could get from the local library for 20 cents. I became so disheartened. I'm a people person, and the idea of excessive charges for company prestige did not sit well with me. So I decided to go back and complete school with an idea of going on to university to do something beneficial with my life, something that I might find satisfying. However, by the time I completed Year 12, I had found work in various pubs, and as I didn't have a passion for anything in particular, I continued working in the hotel industry until I became a manager. I felt life was just a game, so I kept chasing the fun. I rode a motorbike and continued going out with my friends having fun. Sometimes I would think there was a purpose to my life and want to try to change the world and save the trees, for example. But I never made any real effort to do anything except talk to the greenies. I was working as a manager for a pub and one day as I was riding my motorbike to work, I was stopped by the police. As was my habit, I was doing 70 k's an hour in a 60 zone, so he gave me a $100 fine. I wasn't happy and tried my best to talk my way out of it, but the officer wouldn't give in. So I continued on my way to work. Later that day I needed to do the banking, so I took off on my motorbike, and just after I left, I remembered the $100 fine, so I slowed down. And just after I slowed down, this car came tearing out of a side street and into the middle lane, cutting me off. I slammed on the brakes and came to a complete standstill. He only missed me by about an inch. I was in a bit of shock after this, but I started to think, if I didn't get that fine this morning, I would have most likely been dead now. After that, I started thinking that there was something out there, and whatever it was protecting me. Sometime after this incident, I had the urge to travel. I thought about taking a train and visiting relatives I had scattered around Australia. While I was searching for tickets for the train from Perth to Adelaide, which cost about $250, I found a one-way ticket to Cairns for $200. It was cheaper, so I went with it. After I arrived in Cairns, I found a room at a backpacker's lodge and started to look for work. I found work caring for a disabled man. He was in a swimming accident which left him a tetraplegic, unable to take care of the basic necessities. So my job was to cook, clean, shower and dress him. After some time I began to feel compassion for this man, who was trapped inside his disabled body. And I said a prayer. Oh God, if there is a God, let me give up my life so this man can live his. At this point, something strange happened. It felt as though my heart had been flooded with love. Now, although my prayer was not answered, after this experience, I was convinced that there was a God. So I started searching for the truth and talking to everyone about their beliefs. Although I learned briefly about several religions, I already knew that Christianity wasn't for me. I knew I didn't want to be worshipping any man or idol. I wanted to worship the one who created the universe. I was confused about many issues, and I constantly asked God to guide me to the truth. When I smoked, I would ask myself if God would like that. When I wore short dresses and noticed old men staring at me, I would ask if this is what God likes. When I drank alcohol, I would ask if this is something God approves of. All I wanted to do was please God, but I didn't know what was right and what was wrong. Cairns seemed like a very spiritual place, and many different philosophies were discussed. One main theme that was taught was that God was in everything and everyone. But I would look at the rubbish on the streets and wonder, if that were the case, then shouldn't there be perfection everywhere? At that stage, I knew nothing about Islam. Maybe I had seen women covering their heads and wondered why, but other than that, I didn't know a thing. I came back from Cairns and I found another job caring for another gentleman. At one time, he happened to be reading a book, so for conversation, I asked him about it. He related to me that it was about a Muslim woman who was being beaten by her husband. It was the first time I had heard the word Muslim, so I asked him what it was. He told me it is someone who is a follower of the religion Islam, and I asked him what Islam was. We took out the encyclopedia and read that a man called Muhammad began a new religion and wrote a book called the Quran. I thought he must have been some crazy guy and said I would write my own Bible, which I never did. Then I travelled around Australia again, visiting a few friends on the way. I stopped in Byron Bay on my way to Cairns, and one guy told me that the Muslim men have it good because they can marry 4 wives. So until this stage, I really didn't know anything about Islam except that men beat their wives and marry 4 of them. Well, there are a few things which led up to me becoming a Muslim. I returned to Cairns and a couple of guys were travelling to Indonesia for a holiday. It sounded like fun, so I joined them. We headed for Malaysia first, and we met a Canadian lady and a Japanese lady on the way who also came along. In Malaysia, many women cover up, and they told me it was their religion. From KL in Malaysia, we took a 10-hour bus trip down to Malacca and stayed in a hotel which had "no pork" written on the fridge. Again, they told me it was part of their religion. Then we caught a boat over to Dumai in Indonesia and another 12-hour bus trip back up north. I'm a friendly person, and on the bus there was one guy sitting next to me who kept looking at me. I was happy to be adventuring, and I didn't know what his problem was. He kept trying to kiss me. I kept pushing him away, but he kept making advances. It was strange. He wasn't forceful, but like he just lost his mind. I wasn't able to sleep next to that guy, so I had to ask one of the men I was traveling with to swap places. I thought that those women are covering their heads for a reason. We continued traveling until we came to our destination. It was such a beautiful place. Lake Toba is on the top of an old volcano, and in the middle of the lake is an island with more mountains. It was breathtaking, sitting on the island beach, seeing the mountains reflected on the lake as a perfect backdrop. I thought how amazing that God could create such wonderful places. I ran out of money while staying at Lake Toba, so I headed back by myself. I went up this time to Medan and took the ferry back to Malaysia, landing in Pulau Penang. I walked for around an hour after getting off the boat and then decided to ask for the bus station. They pointed to the building across the road. I had walked straight there. During my whole journey, I felt as though God was guiding me. By the time I got off the bus at the airport, I only had $20 left. I went straight to the counter and requested to have my flight changed. She informed me that the next flight was in 5 days. I knew $20 would not suffice me for 5 days, so I asked if there was another flight bound to anywhere in Australia. She told me there was a flight departing to Darwin in a few hours. Yes, I'll take it, please. She tried charging me $100. I didn't have any money, so I begged her, please. She wouldn't help me at all. With nothing else to do, I headed for the viewing room to watch the airplanes leaving. When I got there, I found another lady with her son. We got talking and she told me how her husband had kicked her out and she had no friends, no money, and no place to go. But I noticed that while she was there, the cleaners brought her food, and the following day they had found her work and a place to live. I understood that God was taking care of her and that He would take care of me too. While staying at the airport, I saw a vision. I saw myself wearing a scarf and speaking a language I didn't understand. I understood that God wanted me to become a Muslim. Later, I went out to have a cigarette, and there I started talking to a local Muslim. After I explained my predicament, he offered to help. I thought that this help was coming from God, so I accepted. He took me to a friend's apartment where a few of his friends were living. During my stay with them, we spoke about our beliefs, and I learned a little about Islam. They told me they believe there is only one God, which I also believed. They said Muslims pray 5 times a day, but they didn't. They said they are supposed to fast daily for a month, perform a pilgrimage, give obligatory charity, which they said was just 5 ringgit. They told me they don't eat pork or drink alcohol, and they told me they were supposed to get married before living together, and women should wear the scarf, which she wasn't. It seems they weren't really practicing their religion. They treated me very nicely, and then the time for my flight came around. Before going to the airport, the guy I first met asked me to stay. After seeing that vision, I had thought I would get married and become a Muslim, so I said okay. He seemed a little shocked, and then he told me he was married. I knew that Muslim men can marry 4 wives, so I said no problem. I stayed in Malaysia and had my father transfer me some money so I could move around. I thought this gentleman intended to marry me, but when he didn't ask after a few weeks, I asked him. He said he needed permission from his first wife, but I hardly saw him again after that, so I left and went on my way. I found a hotel and went and got a bite to eat from a nearby restaurant and found myself a paper. I found a room to rent in the paper and got talking to the restaurant owner. and I told him I was interested in becoming a Muslim. He gave me his phone number and told me to call if I needed help. I had already given up on the idea of marriage and thought it best just to become Muslim by myself. When I moved into the apartment, I had some interesting flatmates. I had a room to myself and there was a couple in one room. The wife was Christian from the Philippines and her husband was from Nigeria. Then in the last room about 7 Indians were camping. I spoke to all of them about their various beliefs. I was not interested at all in Hinduism and worshipping various animals. The Christian lady was really nice and showed me all her films like Jesus of Nazareth, which I found a little interesting as the women were all covering like the Muslims. I told her I wanted to become Muslim and she told me how she did a 1-month course to become Muslim to get married, but her husband was something else. He was the first Muslim I had seen praying 5 times a day. Although he had a very dark complexion, it was as though he had light radiating from his face. When I compare his character to his wife, I saw this stark contrast. He was very calm and kept to himself, while she was active and involved in everything. She smoked and drank while he didn't. I'm amazed how they are married. Absolute opposites. After a couple of days, I rang the restaurant owner and told him I wanted to become Muslim. He rang back a few days later and told me to come to the restaurant. When I got there, he took me and picked up a couple of other sisters and we went to this huge house. The owners were having a baby party. Sheikh Hussein, who was also attending, sat down with me and asked me a few questions about my understanding of Islam, which I must have answered correctly. After some time, the guests gathered and the Sheikh took the baby, said some prayers, shaved the baby's head and put chewed date in its mouth. After the baby had been handed back, he called me forward. I sat in front of him and he explained the 6 pillars of faith: to believe in Allah, His angels, His books, His messengers, the Day of Judgment, and decree, the good and the bad. Then he explained the 5 pillars of Islam: to testify that there is only one God and that Muhammad is his messenger, to pray 5 times a day, to fast the month of Ramadan, to give obligatory charity, zakah, and to make the pilgrimage to Mecca. After agreeing to all of this, I repeated the testimony in Arabic. He then asked what name I would like. So I told him Masura, which was given to me by a group of girls I met while staying in the first apartment. But the Sheikh said Mastura. I again said Masura, thinking he couldn't hear me properly. And again he repeated Mastura. A 3rd time I said it really loudly to make sure, Masura. But he kept his glance down and without changing his expression said Mastura. Then I thought he must know something I don't know, so I kept quiet. It turns out that Masura means pipe, while Mastura means protected, covered and kept, which I think is perfect. I felt so excited and happy I wanted to go and hug the restaurant manager. I stood up and searched the crowd for him. After spotting him, I went to head his way. But the Sheikh saw what was happening and stopped me and indicated that I should greet the women instead. Then I realized all the men were in one section and the women were in another. I felt so embarrassed and then went to the women to share my happiness. They were very generous and they took me upstairs to take my shower. While I was taking my nail polish off, they told me a few of the rules. They said that smoking was not allowed. And I thought, of course, I'd had x-rays taken of my lungs which revealed clots. And I wondered how I could not have deduced that myself previously. And how could God like something that was harmful? And they told me that alcohol was not allowed. Again, I wondered how I couldn't have worked that out myself. Hadn't I seen the harm and damage during my years working in the pubs? Later they gave me an outer garment, scarves to cover my head, and an English translation of the Quran. I was overwhelmed with happiness and gratitude that it moved me to tears. One of the best moments after becoming Muslim was wearing the headscarf. I wore the headscarf on the train on the way back to my room, and I felt truly free. No one was looking at me, staring at my body. I cried again from the mercy of Islam. That was around 6 months before September 11, and until today I continue to learn about Islam and appreciate the mercy of everything it teaches. I understood that my vision was from God and that this was from His guidance, although someone could argue that it was dreams and fantasy. However, since converting, I have increased my knowledge about Islam, and when I learnt about the fallacy of the evolution theory, I felt really deceived by my parents, teachers, and society in general. It is not possible that two beings could simultaneously develop sexual organs which could have the ability to produce offspring. Evolutionists claim that these developments must have occurred in rapid succession, according to the theory of living cells developing based on the need of survival. If that were the case, then we should have seen new reproduction systems developing in homosexuals, not to mention new internal organs developing to prevent harm to the living system, which occurs through genetically modified produce. We haven't seen any such biological advancements. Therefore, it is a baseless theory. Secondly, if life were to occur by accident, it would be even more feasible that life could be reproduced artificially with all the required resources. However, man has not been able to produce new life from non-living substances. Thirdly, even with all the available resources, we haven't even been able to recreate a living cell, such as blood cells, hence the call for donors. I believe my faith in God, Allah, is purely rational, and to say otherwise is to deny the facts. Then belief in Allah as one God is the teachings of all the previous prophets sent by God. And studying Christian scriptures, you don't find Jesus calling on the worship of any besides God, as with all the other prophets. So the teachings of Muhammad are completely congruent with the teachings of the previous messengers. After having studied the biography of Muhammad, it is clear that the Quran could not be written by him for several reasons. One, he was illiterate, and it was taught verbally from memory. Also, he had scribes writing it down on rocks, bones, and anything they could find. It was kept in different places until after his death. Had it been from other than Allah, there would have been many contradictions, and like Chinese whispers, we would have found thousands of versions. However, until today, there is only one Quran, even though there are many chains of transmission. Each chain beginning with the Prophet, who recited the Quran to his student, who then recited it to his student, with each gaining the approval before teaching it to the next. This chain of transmission continues until today, verifying the correct pronunciation of the Quran. As vowels were originally not written, this method served to preserve not only the book, but also the meanings. Secondly, the miracles mentioned in it are too many to enumerate, such as the expanding universe and constriction of the men's chests when rising great heights. Additionally, there are linguistic miracles, such as the rhythm and consistent style. The Quran is the miracle of Muhammad, which gave him the authority to teach the message of Allah. I consider my belief is based on sound reasoning as opposed to fallible theories, such as evolutionists who claim that everything somehow came from nothing and against all the odds just happened to work itself into systems interwoven with other more intricate systems. As for dreams, in Islam, they are not a source of legislation. Rather, they are to instill hope and glad tidings for those who believe. Yes, everyone I spoke to had something different to teach me, and sometimes very contradictory. In the Quran, Allah tells us that He sent His Prophet to teach us our religion. So I make sure that if anyone wants to contribute anything about their religion, then I ask them to bring the evidences from the Quran or authentic narrations from the Prophet. Only those who were sent with miracles have the authority to teach the religion. Everything else outside, I leave it and advise Muslims against it. Allah warns people about speaking of that which they have no knowledge, and the Prophet warned their deeds would be rejected, and those who fabricate lies will be in hell, and those who pass everything they hear are considered liars. So we need to make sure we only act upon sure knowledge. I am not a very good Muslim, but I try to be sincere and please my Creator, Allah. And I hope my experiences have inspired you to be sincere in your endeavour to please your Creator too. Let us strive to be the best we can. Let us strive for Firdaus, paradise. May Allah give us the success to follow His guidance when it comes to us. Ameen.